The prairie stretched out like an endless sheet of faded parchment, scarred by cattle tracks and the jagged shadows of mesquite. The sun had dropped low, bleeding its last light across the ridges until the land itself seemed to flame, though the air carried only dust and the sharp cry of a lone hawk. A man stood at the edge of his field, weather-beaten hat tipped low, shoulders bent under more than labor. His hands were calloused, but his grip on the fence rail trembled as though he held something far heavier than wood. The wind stirred, and with it came the faint rasp of iron creaking in the barn behind him. He did not look back. The ranch was his world, though not by choice. A place built as much to bury a past as to raise cattle, and every board nailed into his bones whispered a concealment. At night, he often sat by the fire, jaw set, eyes dark as old embers, listening for sounds no one else could hear. Sometimes it was nothing more than a branch against the roof. Sometimes it was memory, returned with a weight that left him reaching for a rifle he could not put down. Tonight the quiet pressed in heavier than the air itself, as though the land waited for something to stir. By the time the rider appeared on the horizon, the man had already sensed her. Dust rose first, a pale ghost trailing across the dry flats. The mare was lean, hard-ridden, ribs sharp beneath her hide. The woman in the saddle swayed with exhaustion yet rode steady, each movement suggesting a will that would not break even under the desert sun. She drew close without announcing herself, but her eyes were lit with the watchfulness of someone who had long ago stopped trusting doors or men who stood in them. He said nothing when she dismounted. She tied the reins with deliberate hand, then straightened to meet his gaze. The silence between them was thick, though it was not the silence of strangers. It was something else, two lives bruised by violence, recognizing each other a wound too deep to name. "Water for the horse?" she asked, voice rasping with trailed dust. He nodded once, leading her toward the trough. His movements were careful, measured, as though sudden gestures might shatter whatever fragile balance stood between them. She followed, her boots scuffing against the packed earth, her hand brushing the revolver at her hip more out of habit than intent. The trough reflected the last of the sunset, water dark as oil. She let the mare drink, then turned her gaze back to the ranch. The place was rough, built for endurance, not beauty, weatherboards patched with tin, corrals sagging in places, windmill groaning with each turn, yet it had the solidity of something meant to stand against storms. "You live alone out here?" she asked. He paused before answering, the way a man pauses when the truth carries teeth. "I live with the land. That's company enough." Her mouth tightened at his evasiveness, but she did not press further. Instead, she walked a few paces, eyes drifting to the barn. Its doors were shut tight, a chain heavy across the planks. The wind made it rattle, low and uneasy, like bones clinking in a grave. She tilted her head, studying it. "Your cattle penned in there?" He shifted, jaw clenching. "No." The word was curt, final, but it hung in the air with too much weight. She let it drop, though her eyes lingered a moment longer before turning back. Night gathered quickly, the desert skies swallowing color, until only the pale wash of moonlight remained. He lit a lantern and carried it inside, the glow stretching shadows long across the floorboards. She followed without asking, stepping into a cabin sparse but lived in. One chair by the hearth, a rifle propped against the wall, shelves lined with supplies that spoke of a man prepared to endure solitude for years if need be. She lowered herself onto the edge of the chair, letting the fire warm her hands. He stood at the mantel, silent, staring at the flames as though waiting for them to speak. Finally she asked, "Why take me in?" His shoulders lifted, then fell, like a man considering whether to bother with words. "Roads long. Nights are longer. No sense sending someone back into them without a roof. You don't strike me as the charitable type." His gaze flicked to her then, sharp as steel in lamplight. "And you don't strike me as someone who wanders by accident. What are you really looking for?" Her throat worked, but she did not answer. Instead, she reached into her satchel, pulling free a scrap of paper worn thin at the creases. She smoothed it against her knee. The ink nearly faded, though the words were clear enough. Blood calls to blood. The man's jaw set, and in the quiet that followed the fire popped, sending sparks against the iron grate. His hand closed into a fist, knuckles pale. She watched him with an expression that was neither accusation nor pity, but something between, as though she knew the paper would find him before it found anyone else. "I've seen this before," he murmured at last, voice low as gravel. "Years back. A mark left for men who'd made enemies too deep to bury." Her eyes searched his face. "And you?" He did not answer, only turned toward the window, gaze fixed on the empty land beyond. For a moment it seemed the silence would swallow them whole. Then he spoke, softer than before. "You should leave at first light. And if I don't—" He looked at her, and for the first time his eyes betrayed something beyond hardness. It was fear, raw and unsettled. The fear of a man who knew his past had caught his scent again. "Then whatever's hunting me will hunt you too." Outside, the night carried a sound, a faint, distant echo of hooves against hard ground. Not close, not yet, but there. The woman rose slowly, one hand on the back of the chair, the other brushing her revolver. She glanced at the man, who had already reached for the rifle by the wall. He stepped onto the porch, lantern light spilling around him, and scanned the ridgeline. For a moment there was only darkness. Then a lone figure appeared, a rider silhouetted against the moon, still as stone. The horse shifted, restless, but the rider did not move. The man tightened his grip on the rifle, the wood slick in his palm. A whisper left his lips, meant for no one but himself. "They found me." The rider lingered only a moment longer before turning, vanishing into the night. The dust rose and settled, leaving the prairie silent again. But the silence was different now, edged with promise, with threat. The woman stood at the doorway, the paper still clenched in her hand. Neither spoke. There was nothing left to say. The storm had already begun to gather, and both knew the ranch would not be a place of hiding much longer. Morning broke without warmth. The sun rose pale through a veil of dust, spilling light across the ranch in muted tones, as if even day feared to expose too much. The man moved with quiet precision, saddling a horse, checking fences, his face closed against the weight of what had happened the night before. The woman watched him from the porch, her arms folded, the paper with its ominous words tucked back into her satchel. Her eyes studied him not with suspicion now, but with a sharper kind of interest, the sort given to a man who stood too still when danger prowled close. When he returned to the trough, she joined him, the silence between them stretched taut, broken only by the horse's slurp of water. At last she spoke, voice low but edged with insistence. "That rider on the ridge, you knew him." He did not meet her gaze. "I knew the kind." "That's not what I asked." The man tightened the reins, jaw working. His silence was answer enough. She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "If I'm already in this, I deserve to know what waits out there." His eyes lifted then, shadowed beneath the brim of his hat, heavy with a history he had no wish to unearth. "What waits out there is the reason I built these fences, the reason I keep that barn locked, the reason I don't sleep easy. You wanted shelter. Shelter is never free." The woman studied him, her jaw set. There was no plea in her expression, only a steadiness that matched his own. "Then let me pay the price in knowledge. You keep me blind, you keep me useless." Her words lingered like dust in the still air. He said nothing more, only turned toward the far pasture. She followed him, though he gave no invitation. The land stretched out brittle and vast, grass crisped by drought, barbed wire sagging in places where wind had worn it thin. As they rode the perimeter, he pointed out breaks in the fence, prints in the dust where cattle had been driven off. Each mark was a warning, not of hunger, but of men testing the borders. She leaned down in her saddle, running a hand across the disturbed earth, her face tightening. "They're circling you," she said. "They've been circling a long time." He didn't explain further, but the words lodged in her chest. She thought of the rider silhouetted against the moon, of the paper with its half-burned threat. Blood calls to blood. She wondered what kind of blood his past demanded. At midday, the heat pressed down, thick as iron. They returned to the ranch, sweat streaking their faces, the horses foaming at the bit. Inside, he poured water into tin cups, sliding one toward her across the table. She took it, though her hand brushed his in exchange, lingering just a heartbeat longer than needed. His eyes flicked to hers, quick and unreadable. "Tell me what's in that barn," she said. His grip tightened on his cup. For a long moment, he stared at the wall, the grain of the wood, the scars in its surface. Then, without a word, he rose. She followed him outside, her boots scuffing in the dust. At the barn doors he stopped, key in hand, chain rattling faintly. He didn't look at her, but the muscles in his jaw twitched. "You'll wish you hadn't asked." "I've wished worse," she said. The lock snapped open. He swung the doors wide, and the smell hit first. Oil, gunpowder, sweat old as memory. Inside, rifles lined the walls, crates stacked high, some branded with marks of Confederacy, others bearing scars from outlaw hands. A war hoarded here, buried in dust, waiting to rise again. Her breath caught. "You fought with them?" "I fought against them," he said, voice like gravel. "And then with them." "Depend which year you ask. Men like me don't choose sides. We survived them." She stepped closer, brushing her hand along a cracked crate. The letters still faintly visible. U.S. Army property. Her gaze snapped back to him. "You stole from both." He didn't deny it. "I did worse." The weight of his words settled like stone between them. She searched his face, not for guilt, but for something deeper. What she found instead was resignation. The look of a man who had long ago stopped asking for forgiveness because he knew he didn't deserve it. "You think these men coming, they're from that time?" she asked. His eyes darkened. "I know they are. Families torn apart. Brothers buried in shallow graves. I left debts behind, and debts always collect." She looked at him then, not as a stranger, not as a man who had given her shelter, but as someone tethered to a storm that threatened to pull her under too. And yet, she felt no urge to walk away. Her voice was steady when she said, "Then I'll stand with you." His brow furrowed, a flicker of disbelief crossing his face. "You don't even know the half of it." "I don't need the half. I've got my own debts." The fire in her eyes left him silent. For the first time, he seemed to see her not as a burden, nor as a traveler passing through, but as someone forged by the same brutal hand that had shaped him. He shut the barn doors then, locking the chain again, though it felt more like sealing away his own confession. The rest of the day passed beneath a sky heavy with storm clouds, though no rain fell. They worked side by side repairing fences, the rhythm of labor a fragile truce. Now and again their hands brushed, their gazes lingered too long, but neither spoke of it. Words had weight, and both knew better than to waste them. As night drew near, the horizon darkened in a way that was not storm. Smoke coiled upward in the distance, thin, deliberate. She pointed, her pulse quickening. "That's no accident." He raised the rifle, glassing the ridge with its scope. His mouth tightened. "They're closer than before." By the time they returned to the cabin, the air carried the acrid tang of burned sage. He lit a lantern, the glow soft against the walls, but his face was hard. She unrolled her bedroll by the fire, laying her revolver within reach. The silence between them was no longer tense, but heavy with preparation. Just as sleep threatened, a sharp crack split the night. The sound was unmistakable, a rifle's report echoing off the hills. They rushed outside, boots thudding against the porch. In the corral a steer bellowed once, then fell still. Its body crumpled in the dirt, blood pooling dark beneath the moonlight. The woman's breath hitched. "They're sending a message." He raised a rifle, scanning the ridge. Nothing but darkness, yet he knew they were out there, watching, waiting. His voice was low, edged with grim certainty. "They're testing the fences and us." The night swallowed his words, leaving only the smell of blood and the knowledge that the storm was no longer coming. It was here. The days that followed pressed down with a weight the sky itself seemed unwilling to bear. Heat thickened until the air shimmered. Cicadas shrilled without pause, and the land lay brittle beneath their boots. The ranch became less a home and more a fortress. Every creak of the boards, every restless shift of cattle at night, felt like the warning breath before a storm. The woman kept her revolver close, cleaning it by lamplight, while the man patched fences and sharpened blades with a grim steadiness. Words between them grew fewer, but each glance carried more meaning, tethering them to one another as danger drew its circle tighter. On the third evening, as the horizon bled into gold and ash, she found him sitting by the corral, staring into the distance. His rifle rested across his knees, though his gaze seemed fixed not on the hills, but on some memory far darker. She sat beside him, the dry boards groaning under her weight. For a while neither spoke. The silence was almost companionable, but she could feel his unrest like a vibration through the ground. Finally she broke it. "You're carrying something heavier than those crates in your barn," she said. His jaw flexed, but he didn't meet her eyes. "Some truths poison more than they heal." "Maybe," she said softly, "but secrets bleed even when you bind them." The word struck him deeper than she knew. He lowered his head, fingers tightening around the rifle until the wood creaked. At last, with a breath like gravel, he spoke. "During the war, I wasn't just a soldier. I was a guide. Took money to lead men through canyons, across borders, into camps. Didn't matter which side they were on, blue or gray, outlaw or lawman. I sold my knowledge of the land to the highest bidder, and when they turned on one another, I took payment from both, knowing damn well it would end in slaughter." Her breath stilled. The weight of his confession pressed into the dusk around them. He kept his eyes on the ground, voice flat. "One night, I led a band of soldiers into a valley where a family had hidden. Promised safety. Promised food. I knew it was coming. I left before the guns spoke. When I came back, there were only ashes and bones." His voice caught, but he forced it steady. "The rider on the ridge, he's blood of that family. I don't know how he survived, but he carries their ghosts, and he'll see me in the dirt before he lets it rest." She closed her eyes, the confession cutting sharper than any blade. Yet when she opened them, her gaze did not hold condemnation. Instead, it held recognition. "You think you're the only one who's walked away from fire? The only one who carries graves in your chest." She swallowed hard. "I got blood on me, too. Maybe not from choice, but it doesn't wash clean." The words bridged something between them, fragile but undeniable. For the first time he looked at her fully, seeing not judgment but a mirror of his own ruin. That night the siege began in earnest. A flicker of movement at the trilene caught her eye first. Then came the hiss of fire and the sudden bloom of flame as a torch arced through the air, striking the barn's roof. The dry wood caught fast, crackling to life with a roar. He shouted, grabbing the bucket line, but there were too many flames, too many shadows moving just beyond the fence. Shots rang out, splinters bursting from posts as bullets tore through the night. She fired back, revolver steady, the muzzle flashing in rhythm with her breath. He moved like a man carved of instinct, rifle raised, each shot deliberate, purposeful. The air stank of smoke and gunpowder, thick enough to choke. Sparks leapt onto their clothes as the barn began to collapse, beams groaning before crashing into embers. The stock inside bellowed in terror before the fire silenced them. When the attackers finally retreated, driven back into the dark, the ranch lay scarred. The barn was nothing but smoking ruin, and the supplies within, grain, tools, the old crates of weapons, were lost to ash. He stood staring at the blackened wreckage, chest heaving, sweat streaked with soot across his face. She touched his arm gently, grounding him before the weight of it broke him. "They'll be back," she said, voice raw. "They'll come for me until they have my blood." His words were hollow, stripped of pretense. She didn't flinch. "Then they'll have to take mine, too." The bond forged in fire that night was something neither of them had expected, nor would they admit aloud. But in the way he leaned against a ruined fence, letting her steady him, and in the way she stayed by his side despite every chance to flee, it was clear enough. At dawn, they found a message carved deep into the wood of the gate. The letters were jagged, deliberate. "Tonight, all debts are paid." The words cut deeper than any blade, for they promised an end neither could escape. He traced the grooves with one finger, expression unreadable. She stood close, the barrel of her revolver gleaming in the first light. The air smelled of smoke and blood, and the prairie stretched silent around them, as though the land itself held its breath. Neither spoke the fear that sat heavy in their throats. Neither spoke the truth that the night ahead would decide whether they live at all. But both understood, without needing words, that whatever came would come to them together. The storm came not with rain, but with firelight and the hiss of boots in dry grass. The night was thick, the moon veiled, the air sharp with smoke that still clung to the ruins of the barn. She stood at the porch rail, revolver in hand, her eyes tracing the shadows that bled from the hills. He crouched by the doorway, rifle steady, every line of his body drawn tight with readiness. The message carved into the gate had not lied. Tonight, debts would be reckoned. The silence before the first shot was unbearable. Even the cattle sensed it, shifting restlessly, lowing as though they too felt the weight of unseen eyes. Then came the whistle of a bullet, sharp and sudden, splintering with just above her head. She ducked, returned fire, the report of a revolver rolling across the plains like thunder. From the ridge, flames leapt as more torches arced high, tumbling into the corral. Smoke billowed, thick and choking, as the attackers poured down like wolves circling their prey. He fired with grim precision, each shot felling a figure in the dark. She stayed close, covering his flank, the two of them moving not as strangers, but as a pair bound by necessity and something deeper that had grown in the long silences between words. The ground shook beneath the hooves of horses, shouts rising above the crack of gunfire. It was war, condensed into one night, and it was theirs alone to endure. One of the attackers broke through the fence line, charging with a knife gleaming. She met him head-on, steel flashing, as she fired at close range. His body fell hard, dust rising around him. Her breath came ragged, but her hands were steady. She looked up to see him watching her, eyes lit not only with respect but with a raw acknowledgement of kinship. They were bound now, not just by survival, but by blood shed together. The fight raged on, relentless. Flames painted their faces, sweat mingling with smoke, each gunshot tearing silence into shreds. They drove the first wave back, but more came, shadows darting at the edges of firelight. From the chaos, a figure emerged, the rider from the ridge, now close enough to see clearly. His face was lean, hard, carved with years of hatred. His rifle was slung across his back, but his revolver gleamed in his hand. He did not fire. He advanced with purpose, eyes fixed on a man who had betrayed his blood so many years ago. The woman raised her gun, but the rancher's voice cut sharp. "He's mine." The outlaw's step slowed as he drew closer, the night stretching thin around them. His words came like a blade. "You led them to slaughter. My family, my blood. Tonight you pay." The rancher lowered his rifle. For the first time in years, his body sagged under the weight of truth. His voice was calm, stripped of all defense. "You're right. I can't wash it clean. I won't beg you for mercy. If it's my blood you want, take it, but leave her out of this." The woman's chest tightened, rage flaring hotter than fear. "You think you get to choose for me?" she snapped, stepping closer, revolver raised. Her voice shook with fury. "I won't watch you give yourself away like cattle to slaughter. If they want you, they'll go through me." The outlaw sneered. "Then you'll die beside him." Time slowed. Lightning split the sky far in the distance, a flicker of white against the horizon. The three of them stood locked in a triangle of hate, love, and debt unpaid. The rancher's eyes found hers, and in them she saw not fear but a plea, forgiveness he knew he hadn't earned. She shook her head once, firm. Not forgiveness. Resolve. The outlaw drew, and so did he. Gunfire exploded, deafening, smoke twisting between them. Pain ripped through the rancher's side, his body staggering as the outlaw's bullet found him. But his own shot struck true, the outlaw falling hard into the dust, breath rattling, eyes glassy with the shock of defeat. The woman rushed forward, catching the rancher before he crumpled. His blood soaked her hands, hot and slick, his breath ragged in her ear. She pressed her palm to the wound, her voice fierce. "Stay with me. Don't you dare leave me here alone." He tried to smile, though it twisted with pain. "I've run from this long enough. Maybe this is how it was always meant to end." "No," she whispered, tears streaking through soot on her cheeks. "You don't get to decide that. Not anymore. We fight, both of us, or none." The world around them had fallen to silence. The outlaws remained melted into the hills, their leader dead, their fury broken. Only the crackle of dying flames and the labored breaths of the wounded filled the air. The prairie seemed to exhale, a long, weary sigh as though even the land had waited for this moment to pass. She held him until the trembling in his body eased. His hand found hers, grip weak but deliberate. "This place," he murmured, voice fading. "It doesn't belong to me anymore. It belongs to whoever dares to stay, whoever dares to make it something better." Her throat tightened, but she nodded, gripping his hand as though to anchor him to the earth. "Then I'll stay. For both of us." The dawn came slow, washing the ranch in pale light. Smoke rose in thin curls from the ruins, and the ground was stained where blood had sunk into the dust. She stood at the gate, the carved words still etched deep. "Tonight, all debts are paid." Her revolver hung heavy at her side, her eyes fixed on the horizon. Alone now, but not broken. Behind her, the land stretched wide and waiting, its silence no longer threatening but solemn, as if honoring the cost of what had been fought for. She turned from the gate, back toward the cabin, back toward the life she had not chosen but had claimed. Some secrets had died with the man who carried them. Others lived on in the woman who dared to shoulder their weight. And as the wind stirred the ashes into morning light, she knew the story was not ending here, but beginning, etched into the land with blood, resolve, and the kind of silence that could only belong to the West.